Good evening, and welcome to this week's episode. This episode contains discussions of grief and bereavement, suicide, loss, and damaged belongings, housing neglect and emotional trauma, and the process of sorting through a child's possessions after death. So if this is too heavy for you, please do pause and perhaps come back another time. Now, amongst the many other things that I have discussed since starting my episodes about the things that nobody tells you regarding grief, it doesn't seem to end. There seems to be quite a lot that people don't discuss, but I will. People will tell you about the anniversaries of their lost loved one. They will tell you about birthdays. They'll tell you about the first Christmases without them, and the empty chairs and missing voices. But nobody tells you what it's like to go through someone's things when they've passed away. They don't prepare you for that. Nobody prepares you for the moment grief becomes practical. Because grief isn't always crying into pillows or staring at old photos. Sometimes grief is opening a plastic storage box. Sometimes grief smells like damp. Sometimes grief looks like mould growing over pieces of a life you thought you had protected. And today, I need to talk about that. Because I did something to me that is it's huge. Something that I never thought I'd be able to do. I went through all of Ollie's things, not just a few photos and some items of school stuff that I'd spoken about previously in another episode, but I mean all of her things. And I don't think people understand what that really means. They hear that sentence and imagine sorting clothes. They imagine perhaps a few boxes, maybe a little sadness. But this wasn't tidying. This wasn't organising. This was excavation. This was emotional archaeology. This was opening sealed parts of my life that I had avoided because somewhere inside me I knew this day would hurt in a way I couldn't explain. And the truth is, it started with the cellar. And I need to say this because it matters. This isn't just grief. This is also anger. This is what happens when people don't listen. This is what happens when you tell letting agents you're worried about damp and they dismiss you. I told them, and I said I was concerned. I'd asked questions, and I did nothing but worry about that cellar, but I was told it was fine, that they had checked it. They reassured me, they said it was okay. But it wasn't okay. And because this house is so small, because there wasn't enough, not because there wasn't enough room, yes, it's a small house, but it's also because grief takes up a lot of space. I had no choice but to put things in storage boxes and place them in the cellar. I thought I was protecting them. I thought I was doing the responsible thing, and I thought plastic boxes meant safety for her belongings. But grief doesn't just take people. Sometimes it comes back for objects too. Opening those boxes felt like another funeral to me. And that's the only way that I can explain it. It's the only words that I can find. Because there were things inside these boxes that I hadn't touched in so long. I have come across photos in other boxes that weren't in the cellar, but in the cellar there was a lot of boxes and a lot of things I hadn't gone through since packing them nearly 2 years ago. There was schoolwork, memories, and pieces of her life frozen in time. And then I saw it. The damp, the mould, the damage, and something in me just sank. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. These things had survived her death. They survived the shock They survived the funeral, and they had survived me not being ready. And then they were destroyed anyway. Not by time and not naturally, but by neglect. Not neglect of me, but neglect from the system, again, that's supposed to protect you. And by being told something was safe when it wasn't. And I cannot explain to you the feeling of lifting up something so precious and realising that you can't save it. And this is not the first time. Remember, I found Ollie. I had to take her down, knowing that I couldn't bring her back. And it felt like I had to do that all over again. And that's a different kind of grief, because you grieve twice. First you lose the person, and then you lose pieces of them. There's schoolwork that I'm never going to see again. The things that she had wrote, things I didn't know would matter until they were gone. And maybe that sounds strange to people. Maybe someone listening thinks it's only paper. But grief teaches you something brutal, and it always seems to do so. A jumper isn't just a jumper. A note isn't just paper. And a toothbrush isn't just plastic. Everything becomes evidence, proof, a fingerprint left behind. And when those things disappear, it feels like the world quietly erases another piece of them. And I'd also lost 14 years of my own belongings too. My own memories. My own history. Because grief doesn't just take your child or your loved one, it rearranges your entire life. And it's bad enough when you've got trauma memory. And these pieces of evidence are everything that you have to try and remember what your brain has lost. But then came the hardest part. The decision. The choosing. And I swear to God, nobody talks about this enough. Because eventually you realise something so impossible. That you cannot keep everything. And that sentence feels like betrayal. Even saying the words out loud here tonight feels like betrayal. I remember sitting there, asking myself, is this okay? Am I allowed to do this? Am I betraying her? Because what nobody tells you is that keeping things can feel sacred, but letting go feels like murder. You question yourself constantly and you pick something up and you stare at it. You may remember the moment and then you ask, do I keep this? And suddenly you feel like you're deciding what matters, and that is unbearable. Because everything mattered. She mattered. So how do you choose? How do you decide what survives? Now, I had to choose what to keep and what not to keep, because obviously I can't keep her things in the cellar anymore, but this house is so small, I can't keep her things in the storage boxes in the spare bedroom, because that spare bedroom will soon become my baby's bedroom. And you can't do that. You can't place your dead child's things with your future child's belongings and self. I don't want my child living through Ollie's ghost, because that's not fair. She deserves to have her own space too, just like Ollie did. And so I had to go through everything, because there was so much. I kept what felt sacred. And believe me, that's difficult because they all feel sacred, everything, even the rubbish that they left behind. And yes, some of the rubbish Ollie had left I kept, such as a broken chewed straw that you have in a cup of milk that changes the flavour of the milk, a lollipop stick, an ice cream stick. But I kept what felt more sacred amongst them, all of them, what was the most sacred. The things that still held her. The things that didn't just belong to her but felt like her. Some things weren't objects, they were anchors, pieces that still carried emotional weight, pieces that still whispered her name. And then there were the things that I have donated. And yes, I had to choose what to donate to other children. And even saying that out loud still hurts, because donation sounds so simple, doesn't it? But there is nothing simple about washing your dead child's clothes for someone else. Nothing. I'd washed them so carefully, folded them with such respect. I touched the fabrics that she once wore. And all I could think was that she should still be here wearing these. And there is something deeply, deeply painful about preparing someone else's belongings for another life. It feels so wrong and beautiful and devastating all at once. And then there was her bike. Her bike. That one broke me more than I actually expected, if I'm honest. Because I could have left it. I could have just let it sit. I could have allowed it to rust. And taken it with me wherever I may have moved in the future. But I kept thinking about another child. Perhaps this child could make use of this bike. You know, a child who could still use it and smile while riding it. And I thought, Ollie wouldn't want waste. That's not who she was. She was kind. She cared. She often gave teddies to children, her own teddies. She would rather something be loved than forgotten. And so I gave it away. I actually saw the people take it. Because I just popped it outside, and people where I am usually, when you put something outside for free, they will make use of that. And that's what happened. And it just so happens she's down the road, which, if I'm here long enough in this house, will be painful to see, but beautiful at the same time. And I hope she gets so much good use out of it. But I cried. I had to come indoors. I couldn't see that. Because giving something away doesn't mean it stops belonging to memory. It just means it belongs somewhere else too. And maybe that's what this episode is really about. Not loss, not objects, but permission. Permission to grieve imperfectly. Permission to keep some things, and permission to let some things go. Permission to ask such impossible questions. Because I think many grieving parents live with this silent fear. If I let go of something, am I letting go of them? And I don't think that's true. I think love changes form. I think grief changes shape. And I think memory learns how to live very differently. And maybe keeping everything isn't always love. Maybe sometimes love is choosing what matters most. Maybe love is protecting what still feels sacred. Maybe love is giving a bike to another child. Maybe love is folding clothes through tears. Maybe love is standing in a cellar full of mould and heartbreak and still trying to honour someone properly. Today, I walked into Bernardo's and donated her clothes, her books. And that was hard enough. But I also had to go through her uniform, her school uniform. And she had 2 sets of everything, but for some reason she ended up with like 6 PE jumpers. And I made a very difficult choice, because while I have negative feelings about the school she attended, all I could think is there would be children that perhaps don't have what she had in regards to uniform. And so I went through the two blazers and found that one of them had paint on with a fingerprint of Ollie. I kept that one. And I kept a school shirt to go with it. And I kept the school tie that she had put stickers on, that she had earned hard work. She'd spent a long time earning those stickers. It was a reward for her hard work. And I kept that. But I donated the rest. I washed them and folded them with such care. And I walked into that school today and gave them to the receptionist with a note inside. And when I left, I thought I did it. This is it. I've managed to do this. And while my partner walked ahead to grab the car and bring it round, I stopped at least 3 times to get my breath back. I started crying and holding on to the rails just for a split moment. And then I picked myself back up. I didn't want them to see me break. Not that place. Not that school. Not the students. That was hard enough. But the other hardest part is that we're nearly at the end of April. And by the time you actually hear this podcast, it will be past that. As I record this, it's actually the 28th of April. I like to pre-record my podcasts just in case anything needs to be organised. But in 2 days' time, my Ollie would have turned 16. I can't tell you how hard April is for me. But this April seems to have been the toughest by far because of everything I've had to experience this month alone. And I also am very well aware that her inquest has happened by now, because by the time this is released, her inquest will have happened. I won't release the date of when that is, but I will do an episode on it. It's a very difficult month. And I wish, if I'm honest, I wish it was done already. But after everything that I've had to go through these last few days, this last week or two even, I didn't stop loving her. And I haven't moved on. And today I didn't heal. Today I did something harder. I'd carried her through another kind of goodbye. And that goodbye didn't happen in a cemetery. It happened through boxes, through dust, through damaged paper, and through impossible decisions, the most impossible decisions. And through asking myself again and again, is this okay? Maybe the answer is this. Love isn't measured by how much you keep. Love is measured by how deeply you carry. And I carry her still, every day. Even now, especially now. If you are grieving, and if you've ever had to go through someone's things, if you stood there holding an object and wondering whether keeping it means love or letting go means betrayal, just know that you are not cruel and you are not heartless. You're not doing grief wrong. You are doing something incredibly human. And sometimes survival looks like choosing what stays and learning how to live beside what couldn't. And those are some of the hardest things that you will ever ask yourself and put yourself through. There is something for me that I've come to learn. Something that I didn't know before loss had entered my life. People think grief is about missing someone, but it's not. Grief has got many facets, many layers. And grief doesn't just end after the funeral's done. Grief is also responsibility. It is paperwork. It is cupboards. It's drawers that you avoid opening. It is deciding what happens to objects when the person who gave them meaning is no longer here to touch them. It is a loneliness people rarely speak about, because you become the keeper of someone else's existence. You become the person responsible for protecting what remains. And that pressure can feel so unbearable. And you question yourself constantly, and you wonder if you are doing the right thing. You also wonder if you are betraying them, and you wonder if you are forgetting something important. And you wonder if they would be angry, or if they would understand. And the hardest truth that I have learned is this: there is no perfect way to do this. There is no handbook for grieving someone you loved enough to break you. There is no right timeline and no correct number of belongings to keep. There's no magical answer that suddenly makes it feel okay. You are simply doing your best inside such an impossible situation. And sometimes your best looks messy. Sometimes it looks like crying over mouldy paper. Sometimes it looks like sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes. Sometimes it looks like anger and guilt. Sometimes it can look like donating something and then sitting in the car afterwards questioning whether you had made a terrible mistake. And I need you to know this: you are not a bad person for surviving, and you are not cruel for making decisions. You're not betraying someone by continuing to live. You are actually honouring them. Because grief has a way of making us believe that suffering equals loyalty. That if we smile, we are forgetting. That if we let go of an object, we are letting go of a person. But love doesn't work like that. Love is not stored in cupboards. It's not trapped in storage boxes either. And love is not measured by how much dust-covered evidence that you keep. Love lives in memory, in habit, and in language. In the way your body still reaches for them, and in the way certain songs hurt you. It's in the way certain smells stop you as well, as I've recently figured out. And it's in the way you still talk to them when nobody is watching. That is where love survives. And I think today and the last few days have taught me something painful but important. Keeping everything is impossible. But carrying someone, that part never ends. And maybe that's the real difference, because I do not carry every object. I carry Ollie. I carry her laugh and her humour, and I carry the way she said things. I carry the chaos she brought into a room, and I carry the pain of losing her. And I carry the love of having had her. And that matters more than any box ever could. So if you are standing in your own version of a cellar right now, if you are looking at damaged things, if you are holding something and wondering whether to keep it or let it go, please be gentle with yourself, because you are not deciding how much you loved them. You are deciding how to survive them. And there is a difference, a very, very important difference. So take your time. Cry when you need to, and keep what feels sacred to you. Let go of what you cannot carry. And trust this: you do not lose someone twice by loving them honestly. You honour them by continuing to hold what mattered most. And sometimes what mattered most was never an object, it was the person themselves. And that person still lives inside you. And there is something else that I need to say before this episode comes to an end. Because people often think that going through someone's belongings is just about the loss. But sometimes it's not. And that shocked me, if I'm honest. It really did shock me. Sometimes it's also about the release. And that feels almost impossible to admit. And it does also, even saying these words out loud to you tonight feels again like betrayal. Because when you're grieving, relief can also feel dangerous, not just betrayal. You question it. You feel guilty for it too. You wonder if feeling any lighter somehow means that you loved them less. But I've learnt something while sitting amongst those boxes. The weight was not only in grief. The weight was in carrying decisions I'd been too afraid to make. And believe you and me, these decisions, they were a long time coming for me. Every untouched box held pressure. Every sealed lid held avoidance. And every item waiting in the darkness held a question I did not feel strong enough to answer. And when you live with grief long enough, those unanswered questions become heavy, not physically, but emotionally. And they sit in the background of your mind, quietly, constantly, and waiting. You walk past them every day, and you tell yourself, I'll deal with it later. I'm not ready. No, not today. Definitely no, not today. But grief does not disappear just because we postpone it. It waits. And sometimes it grows heavier. Because those belongings become suspended in time. They become frozen. They become untouched. And in turn, so are parts of you. Now, what surprised me most was not the pain of choosing. It was what happened after. Because after the tears, the falling to my knees, the gasping for breath, after the mould, the guilt, and after deciding what stayed and what left, there was space. And I don't mean empty space in a room. I mean emotional space, breathing space, a tiny bit of quiet where there had only been pressure. Because every item you keep becomes something you continue to carry. And every item that you would let go of, you ask yourself, did I do the right thing? And every item you let go of asks you to trust yourself. To trust that memory does not disappear because an object does. And believe you and me, with my trauma memory, I pray to remember. I could have took pictures to help myself remember. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't do it. I tried. I just couldn't. And you also ask to trust that love survives beyond the physical things. And that is hard, because grief teaches us to cling, to hold tighter, to fear losing more. But sometimes holding everything means carrying pain that never gets to move. I think many grieving people are not only afraid of letting go, they are afraid of what letting go means. Because if you donate something, or if you throw something away, if you decide something cannot stay, it feels final. And grief already feels full of unbearable finality. You think, what if I regret this? What if this mattered more than I realised? What if this was the last piece? And you find that those questions can trap you. That they can keep you frozen for so many years. Because every object becomes emotionally loaded. A test. A responsibility. Or a silent contract. And eventually you realise you are not just holding belongings anymore, you are holding fear. The fear of forgetting, the fear of guilt, or the fear of getting grief wrong. But here's what I learnt. Choosing what to donate did not make me love her any less. Throwing away damaged things did not erase her either. Keeping sacred things did not make me selfish. It simply made me human. Because grief asks impossible things of us. And one of the hardest things is this. Learning that loving someone does not mean preserving every single thing they touched. Sometimes loving someone means allowing their belongings to stop carrying all that pressure. Sometimes it means allowing yourself to stop carrying all the pressure too. And there is a quiet kindness in that, a softness, a permission. Because grief is exhausting, not only emotionally, guys, but physically, mentally, and spiritually. You carry memories, you carry anniversaries, and you carry guilt. You carry love, and you carry questions that never fully leave. And sometimes you do not realise how heavy you have become until you put something down. Now, that does not mean it stops hurting. It does not mean the room suddenly feels okay. And it does not mean you stop missing them. It does not mean you stop wanting them back. Because I would honestly trade every object in the world for one more conversation, one more laugh, one more ordinary day. But I cannot have that. And that truth remains. But what changes is this. You stop fighting the impossible task of preserving everything, and instead, you begin preserving what matters most. And maybe that is not betrayal. Maybe that is love becoming practical. Maybe that is grief learning how to breathe. So if you are listening here and you're standing in front of boxes that you cannot open, whether that be physically or emotionally, if you are terrified of making the wrong decision, if you feel sick at the thought of donating something, please, for the love of God, know this. You are not throwing away your person. You are not abandoning them in any way, shape or form. You are not dishonouring their memory. You are simply trying to survive the unbearable responsibility of carrying what remains after they're gone. And sometimes survival asks us to loosen our grip, not tighten it. And it's not because we stop loving, but because love should not crush us beneath its own weight. And maybe that is what I learned in that cellar. That grief is not only about holding on. Sometimes grief is also about gently setting something down and trusting that love stays anyway. The lessons that we learn in grief are very, very difficult. Grief also teaches us the things that we never even asked to learn in the first place. It teaches you that love does not disappear when a person does. It teaches you that love does not disappear in any way. It teaches you that memories can hurt and heal in the same breath. And it teaches you that survival is not graceful. Sometimes survival looks like getting through 1 hour at a time. It teaches you how fragile life really is and how quickly ordinary moments can become sacred. It teaches you how one voice, one laugh, or one text message can become so priceless. It teaches you that people will disappoint you, that some will disappear when things get heavy, and that others will quietly stand beside you without needing to fix anything. Grief teaches you patience, because healing is not linear. Some days you feel strong, and some days you fall apart over something so small. And both days are very real. Grief teaches you that love changes shape, that someone can be gone physically but still exist in your routines, your language, or your habits, and your heart. It teaches you that guilt is very common, and that anger belongs here too. That missing someone does not always look soft, sometimes it looks loud and unfair, and impossible. And maybe the hardest lesson grief teaches is this: you do not move on, but you do move forward. You carry them differently. You learn how to live while still loving someone you cannot hold anymore. And that is not weakness. That is one of the bravest things a human being can do. Now, I want to thank you all for listening to this week's episode. God knows I think this has been one of the most hardest episodes I've had to record. Emotionally, I mean. But nonetheless, this is grief. And this is my grief journey. And for anyone who can relate to this episode, please do reach out. Know that you're not alone. Know that you do have a place here to be heard and supported. If you do want to reach out, you can reach out to us anonymously. And you can do this to astoryofgrief@outlook.com. And as usual, guys, I'll be back next Sunday at 6 p.m. Thank you for listening.